Good evening. My name is Stephen Wolfpock. I'm the Director of Programming and Marketing for the Kansas City Public Library, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this latest installment in our online series of signature events. It looks like perhaps the end might be in sight for this pandemic that has upended our lives over the last several months, and we hope to someday soon get back to doing these events in person at the library. More on that hopefully in the near future. I should mention before we get started, if at any point during the presentation tonight you have questions, you can drop those in the comments or the chat box on our YouTube page, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Bill Tammeus has been something of a regular presenter at the library, and certainly one of our favorite presenters. He joins us again this evening for a discussion of his new book, just released today, in fact, Love, Loss, and Endurance, a 9/11 story of resilience and hope in an age of anxiety. The book is available from most major retailers, but we like to point people to bookshop.org, where your purchase supports independent booksellers across the country. A member of the Kansas City Star staff for almost 36 years, sharing the 1982 Pulitzer Prize for Local Reporting and winning the 2005 Wilbur Award from the Religious Communications Council for the best religion column in the country, Bill Tammeus has had an extraordinary career in journalism and as an author of several books. We're thrilled to have him tonight for a discussion of his latest. Bill, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Steve, and thank the rest of you for being here this evening. And thanks to the terrific Kansas City Public Library for providing this opportunity. I hope all of you understand what a treasure our library is and how well it has pivoted in this time of pandemic to meet so many needs. Well, we gather tonight on the 116th wedding anniversary of my maternal grandparents, and one day after my own birthday. I mention all that just to say that my new book, which as Steve mentioned was officially published today, is in many ways about family, and especially how families can decide either to hold together or fall apart when confronted by catastrophe. The book, as you know, is called Love, Loss, and Endurance, and it's about considerably more than family. But let me start with family by describing the murder of my nephew and how I learned about it the morning of the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001. But before I do, let me just say that I do not intend to talk on and on tonight. Rather, I hope to respond to your questions and comments. So you might be thinking about what you'd like to ask so that when we get to that point, we won't just stare at one another in embarrassed silence via virtual reality. So on September 11, 2001, I was still an editorial page columnist for the Kansas City Star. And it was my habit to arrive at the desk in my cubicle shortly after 7 a.m. each day. I had a 13-inch TV set on my desk that was often on, but with the sound muted. I would usually tune in to CNBC first thing when I arrived just to see where the stock market was headed that day. Before long, that Tuesday, I noticed that something unusual was happening on the screen. So I listened for a minute and then I flipped over to CNN to see what else I could learn. When the shape of what was happening was clear, Star editors decided to publish the first extra edition of the Star since I had started working there in September of 1970. And they asked me to write the lead commentary piece for that edition, which meant I had about an hour and a half to cobble together maybe 800 or so words that would try to say something intelligent to our readers about this madness. Just before I started writing the column, I punched some buttons on my phone, my desk phone, to prevent it from ringing and interrupting me. By doing that, I forwarded my calls to our editorial page secretary, Trudy Hurley. Unless it's my wife, I told her, please just take messages for me until I finish this. Voicemail at the Star phone system was in the future. When I was about 2/3 of the way through the column, Trudy slipped into my cubicle, put a hand on my shoulder gently, and said, almost in a whisper, "It's your wife. She needs to talk with you." Marcia got on simply and asked this, "Have you read your sister's email?" I hadn't. "Please read it," she said, and was gone. Although that sounds like a simple assignment, the terribly out-of-date technology then available to us in the Star newsroom meant that I had to log out of a separate word composition program and log into Windows 3.0, as I recall, which had already been succeeded by Windows 3.1 in 1992 and Windows 95 in 1995, and thus was years behind the update curve. It was a maddeningly slow process, and on this day, it seemed both morose and glacial to someone on deadline. When I finally got my email system open, I found a note from my sister, Barbara Fife, with this subject line: "Very bad news." It simply said that from what she and her husband Jim could tell from their home in North Carolina, their son, my nephew, Carlton Douglas Die Fife, who lived in the Boston suburb of Brookline, was a passenger on the first plane, American Flight 11, to crash into the World Trade Center. This disastrous possibility had not yet been confirmed, but everything pointed to it being true, as it turned out to be. My heart fractured into a million serrated pieces. Carlton and I, after all, had developed an especially close relationship. When Carlton died, he was 31 years old, married, and the father of a 19-month-old boy. The Sunday before he left Boston on that Tuesday to fly to California for a business meeting, he was a bond analyst with John Hancock, his wife Haven told him that she was pregnant again. That baby, Parker, was born in May of '02, and of course never had a chance even to meet his daddy. That same Sunday, September 9th, I got an email from Carlton with a picture of his son Jackson sitting in a bucket on the beach. I laughed. 2 days later, I cried. So why did Carlton die? He died because 19 hijackers had bought into the wildly bogus ideas that Osama bin Laden and others had taught them, which included the delusion that God wanted them to murder people to punish the United States for a series of alleged sins. Bin Laden and his followers claimed to be Muslims, but their curdled theology had twisted Islam beyond recognition in much the same way that the Ku Klux Klan and today's current batch of white Christian nationalists bend Christianity into an unrecognizable mess. And that too is what I write about in this new book. Through a series of short interludes, as well as a longer chapter on the theological roots of extremism, I point to case after case of rigid, magical thinking that has led to violence, from the Holocaust to the murders of Black people at Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina, to the murders of the son and father of my friend Mindy Corcoran and the wife of my friend Jim Lamano by a neo-Nazi here in Kansas City. Mindy, by the way, has written the foreword for the book, and the Reverend Adam Hamilton, founding pastor of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, has written the foreword. In addition, one of this country's best known and wisest Muslims, Ibu Patel, founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps, has written an endorsement blurb for the book that you will find on the back cover. I have to tell you that I had no idea, of course, that when we set today as the publication date for this book, it would be less than 2 weeks after Trump-inspired extremists would engage in insurrection at our nation's capital with the help of what I've come to call the Putsch Caucus, led by Senators Josh Hawley of Missouri and Ted Cruz of Texas. The rioters, we now know, included followers of the QAnon conspiracy theorists, the white nationalist hate group known as the Proud Boys, other white supremacists carrying Confederate flags, and members of other radical hate groups whom Trump has been encouraging in various ways since he entered the 2016 race for president. I tell you, I frankly don't see much difference between the Capitol Hill rioters and the 9/11 hijackers. Both groups bought into lies, whether political or theological, that wound up costing people their lives. In the book's last chapter, I try to suggest various approaches that you and I can adopt to try to stand against extremism. And I hope readers will spend some time thinking about those approaches and what might work for them. I'd like to say that I'm profoundly optimistic that if we use these and other ideas to unplug extremism, that the world will turn into a peaceful place in just a few weeks. But I have read history and I know better. And yet, I think we must be inspired and guided by, for instance, how Martin Luther King Jr., whom we celebrated yesterday, kept bearing witness to the truth, even when he knew that it might cost him his life, as of course it did. At the end of W.H. Auden's famous poem, September 1st, 1939, he acknowledges that he is beleaguered by, quote, negation and despair. And yet he says that he may be strong enough, that he asks rather that he may be strong enough to show an affirming flame, as he puts it. That too is my prayer for all of us as we confront this darkness. Well, this is my 7th book, including 2 that had co-authors. Each book provided a different writing experience from the one before or after it. Our book about Polish rescuers in the Holocaust took Rabbi Jacques Kukierkorn and me about 4.5 years to write. Other books took much less time for various reasons. This new book took me, in a sense, almost 20 years to write, which is to say that I have been saving emails, letters, notes, blogs, and columns on this subject since 9/11 happened, not sure what I would eventually do with all those files. But in the end, I decided that I was obligated to tell this story, in part because I'm one of the few professional journalists whose family was directly affected by 9/11. I know of only one other, Mike Casey, and Mike worked at the Star at the time too. One of Mike's cousins died that day at the Pentagon. Not everyone in my extended family wanted me to write this book. Carlton's parents, his widow, and one of his sisters gave me either permission or encouragement or both. But his other sister didn't want it written, partly because she didn't want to deal with media again, and partly because she believed that I would simply profit off her brother's death. So that was one more complication the terrorists threw at our family. Before I turn to your questions and comments, I would like to read just part of a chapter that I hope will give you a small sense of what my family lost when Carlton died. And Carlton, by the way, we often called KDBF for his full name, and you'll hear that in what I'm about to read. But as I read that, please do not think just about my family, but also the almost 3,000 other families who were devastated by death that malevolent day, and the thousands and thousands of other families who have gone through this kind of trauma, including coronavirus. or trauma because of other terrorist attacks, some of them faith-based around the world since then, including the January 6th loss of life at our Capitol building. I'm reading from chapter 21 for those of you who have books and want to follow along. It says this: on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, in 2001, Barb and Jim, my sister and her husband, Carlton's parents, sent out a note to their extended family asking members to share, quote, your cutest or any memory of Carlton. So again, we were drawing on reminiscence, on those flashes of minutes or even seconds that fight their way to the top of our mental storage units and compete for attention as a way to keep alive something about someone who isn't alive anymore. It's a distillation process. Important, yes, but also shadowy, incomplete, even perhaps at times misleading. And yet on that 10th anniversary, that's what Carlton's parents bid us do, and we were all in. KDBF's sister Tiffany quickly recalled that, quote, no matter how much I wrote in emails to Carlton, he would write back at most 2 sentences. The best part was that he always signed his emails to me, your handsome brother. I've long been aware of Carlton's habit of doing something like that with many of us, and I've quit wondering whether it revealed in him some insecurity about himself. I don't think it did. In fact, I'm sure it didn't. Rather, I think he was simply tapping into our family's habit of using humor in odd ways. I wrote a daily humor column for the Kansas City Star for 27 years, and I value humor. It flattens the playing field. It unstuffs shirts. By juxtaposing things that don't naturally go together, it reveals what can seem like absurdity, the absurdity of the human condition. I think Carlton understood that, and Tiffany's note reminded us that he did. Haven, his wife's response to the request for memories that year, revealed that inside this tall, grown man, there was always a happy little boy. Here's what she wrote. My cutest memories, the 2 times we found out that I was pregnant and watching him run around the house yelling, a baby, and watching him teach Jackson, his son, how to skip. Nothing like a 6'5" guy skipping down the street with a toddler. Adorable, she wrote. Well, if that wonderfully human image is planted in our heads, Carlton will never be completely gone. And I'm sure that some 3,000 other 9/11 families have been rescuing their lost member from annihilation through similar memory recall exercises. My daughter Kate chimed in with, I won't ever forget flying into Raleigh-Durham for Aaron's high school graduation. I sat on the runway in Atlanta because a tornado was touching down on the runway. I missed the graduation, but Carlton was there to pick me up at the airport in Raleigh-Durham after it. I was a hot mess, she wrote, hot mess of nerves after that experience, but we literally laughed the entire drive home from the airport. By the time I got to the Fife House, I had nearly forgotten about my flying experiences. One of the more revealing memories of KDBF of who he was at his core came from his cousin Amanda, daughter of my sister Mary. Here's what she wrote. One time when we were all at the Woodstock house, that's the house in Woodstock, Illinois, where I grew up and where my parents still lived at the time. Once when we were there for a holiday, we all decided it would be a good idea to play Monopoly. Amanda said, I think I was probably about 8 and KDBF was 12. If the other players were Aaron, Kate, and Leeson, my other daughter. At least an hour, maybe more into that game, Amanda says, I was losing badly. In what was to be my first ever blatant attempt at cheating, I stole a couple of hotels from Erin's property and hid them. She didn't see me do it, but Carlton sure did. And when Erin finally noticed part of her empire was missing, Uncle Jim, Erin and Carlton's father, who was Erin's partner, asked who took them and where they were. Silence. When the line of questioning came my way, I full out blamed it on Carlton. I remember I actually said I saw him take the hotels, even though I knew full well that he spotted me taking the hotels. Uncle Jim immediately took him upstairs for a loud talk, and I could hear KDBF very upset. I remember sitting on Grandpa's old green chair, riddled with guilt, yet I was clearly too deep into the lie to come clean, at least in an 8-year-old's mind. After a good amount of time had passed, KDBF appeared in the living room with very red eyes. He looked right at us and clear as day said, I am sorry for cheating. Then he went back upstairs and went to bed. He never threw me under the bus. And for a 12-year-old boy, Amanda wrote, I find that amazingly protective and brave. He took my punishment. And I'm pretty sure he never held a grudge because he acted normal the next day to me, which I remember as strange because I was so ashamed that I could barely look at him. Anyway, as we got older and fantastically sarcastic, I always asked Carlton if he wanted to play Monopoly. And he always said, with you, shit, no way. And by the way, I think I never came clean to Jim about the fact that it was me cheating. So I'm now in for it. Well, it turned out that Mandy wasn't in for it at all now because Jim replied, holy crap, I have not a single memory of that incident. Who the hell was I, the enforcer or something? Did I break his kneecaps too? To which Mandy responded, glad you don't remember. I've been sweating this one out for almost 30 years. That young kid with a protective moral center grew into a profoundly moral adult with a marvelous sense of humor, captured in a memory that my daughter Leeson shared in response to that year's request for memories. Leeson wrote this, I was picking Carlton up at the airport. I don't recall why, and he'd been on a job interview recently. It must have been right after college or something. I asked him how it went, and he said he thought it had gone well. And then he added, I know I left an impression. I wasn't wearing any pants. Well, that's a good place to stop, except to add that I obviously still miss Carlton, including his completely random emails to me that always seemed to arrive when I needed a lift. One message that I got more than once simply said, hey, did I ever tell you how tall and handsome I am? That was it. Well, he was both tall and handsome. I'm 6'3.5", and Carlton ended up 6'5". So I looked up to him in more ways than one. But now I would like to get on to your questions and comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. That was great. So we do have some audience questions. I'm going to start here. So as you probably expected, you've sparked a little bit of a 9/11 discussion in the comments, and there is one here that I do want to ask you, and that's about when. Let's see, how has the closeness of your personal loss and pain from 9/11 affected your willingness or ability to objectively look into 9/11 facts? And I think that's relevant, not necessarily because of 9/11, but because of anything. Can the events at the Capitol or COVID, can a personal experience make it more difficult for somebody to objectively look at historical events?
Yeah, I certainly can. But I was I was blessed in several ways. I'm going to refer just to 9/11 right now, and I can get to the Capitol later. But I spent 2 years of my boyhood in India, and while I was there, I was introduced to Islam in different ways. We lived next to a Muslim village. I played with Muslim children. And so I had a sense of what this ancient and generally, and I would say honorable religion was about. Um, and so when it was clear that there were people in the world who were abusing this religion, distorting it, twisting it, um, I knew that that was not what Islam was meant to be. And so when 9/11 happened, a lot of people who learned about Carlton's death thought, well, I had every good reason to hate Islam, to hate Muslims because of this. And it was because I had already, I was already, first of all, writing about religion professionally, and thus was obligated to know about Islam, to know about Judaism, to know about Buddhism, to know about many other faith traditions, and not to blame a small group of people as though they represented, as though that group represented the whole. So this takes me back to the idea that it's really important to get the facts, to look at what's verifiable. And we saw on 1/6, what I call the 1/6 terrorist attacks, a lot of people who clearly missed what truly had happened in the election and were willing to believe nonsense. And that is what has cost us a great deal. But the lesson for me is to go back to my basic journalism teaching. When I went to J school, you have to look at truth. You have to find the facts. Now, I've spent much of my career as an opinion journalist, but even my opinions need to be based on facts that are verifiable and I can share with readers.
Okay. Here's another one, a question for you, Bill. Why is it important for us to share personal stories like yours? Oops, I lost it. I'm sorry. While I look for that, let me ask you the question
Okay.
that I was asking you about before we started. Putting aside the attacks on the Capitol and everything that's going on with politics, just COVID in general, I think somebody could look at your book and think that it was about dealing with grief during this pandemic and the stay-at-home orders. Is there any advice that someone dealing with those things can draw from this book?
Yeah, there is. At the end of the book, as I mentioned, I have some ideas for ways to sensitize ourselves to find ways to oppose extremism. And one of those ideas is to spend time with people in grief. A good friend who's a rabbi read the book this week, finished it today, in fact, and sent me a note and said, I'm going to send this book to share this book with people who have lost children and are in grief because of it. Because he said, I think there's a lot in there that can be helpful to them. What a story like this does is it finds its goal, at least, is to find our common humanity, to recognize that all of us will have losses in our lives. All of us will run up against disaster, and that if we cannot be there for one another in some way through this, then what good are we? We really have to find ways to share our grief, because it's too heavy for us to hold alone. So I've been able to share my grief about Carlton initially with my own church family at Second Presbyterian in Kansas City, but beyond that with other people in the interfaith community where I spend a lot of time. And it's in that sharing that we find that we are walking often in the same shoes, and that we have this in common, and that's how you get through this stuff, I think.
Circling back after technology got the better of me there for a second, why is it important for us to share personal stories like yours that connect us to events, whether local, national, or global, that connect and affect us all?
I think it is why our parents and grandparents told us where they were when they heard about Pearl Harbor, where they were, what they were doing when they heard about Kennedy's assassination. It's a way of connecting the great big stories of life to our personal lives, and to recognize that we are in some ways affected by those things. You may not have known anybody except me now who was directly affected by 9/11, but I want you to know that there were lots and lots and lots of families who were. And so it's important to recognize that reality and to somehow reach out to others, because in every person you meet, there is a story of some grief, of some hurt. And you may not get to that story with them today, but it may turn out to be that this very day means something to them. It might have been on the 19th of January in 2006 that something terrible happened in their family. And the calendar is packed with those dates. And so we need to treat each other gently, and to recognize that the large stories in life also are about us, and to find our connection to those stories.
I wonder, you wrote a column about this, you said a little while back, but is that need for connection amplified these days when the pandemic is preventing people from maybe mourning in the ways that they traditionally have?
Oh yeah, it sure is. I miss people. I'm part of a couple of groups that meet weekly, and now we're meeting on Zoom. We'll meet 6:45 tomorrow morning, a group that I meet with every week. Traditionally, we meet in a house. I can't see those guys in person. COVID has locked us in, has locked us down, has made us hungry for the human contact. And the last several times I've introduced a book at the library, I've had a room full of people, and afterwards could talk one-on-one with them. And now here we are. I can't see any of you. You can see me, and sorry about that. This is what I look like. But yeah, we have to find ways to overcome that. And we've pivoted to do that in many ways, but it's just not the same. And so when we are finally past this time, when we're all vaccinated, when somehow we can get out with each other again, I think we will appreciate more than ever what human contact means and what human touch means. And let's hope we never forget that.
Another question from our audience. As we're about to have a new administration tomorrow, what do you hope the Biden administration will do to lessen religious extremism in our country? And what can ordinary citizens do?
Well, there's not a lot that a presidential administration can do to affect religion in this country, except to behave in decent ways, to model what what it looks like to live out a life of faith. Joe Biden, as you know, has been a member of the Catholic Church for his whole life, and he has certain principles that he will, I feel confident, try to live out. But one thing that any administration can do is to try to make sure that the public understands that the wall of separation between church and state is not to keep religion out of the public square, it's to keep government out of religion. So people of faith should have their voices heard in the public square. They should not, one group should not be privileged over another, but an administration that can make that point to people and can give opportunities for people of faith to work together, to be together, that can be helpful. The administration that's just leaving has in many ways stirred up people of faith in unhealthy ways. And I hope this new administration can do better than that.
Okay. I think that this is an interesting one, given your background as a reporter. We've heard more than 4 years of the fire hose of lies. What can fractured media do going forward to restore kind of political calm?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to recognize that the word media today refers to this huge range, all the way from what used to be traditional newspapers to a blog by a guy in his basement who never gets out of his basement, to all kinds of other media events and channels. So we have to be discerning about what we take in, and we have to never rely on one single source. If you're relying just on the Kansas City Star, you are an uninformed citizen. If you are relying just on Fox News, you are an uninformed citizen. You have to have a variety of sources and to check them against one another. Now, we are such busy folks that we can't do that as much as we should, but if you don't do it at all, the chances of you being misled are high, and the chances even of you causing damage in the world because you buy into something that's simply not true. We just saw that in Washington last week, and we have to, that's what we need to fight against. You be a discerning consumer of media is what I would say, and don't trust simply one source alone.
We have somebody else asking, can you please share what kinds of things have helped you and your family as you've grieved your loss?
Well, the first thing that helped was that right after 9/11 happened, one of our associate pastors came to our house. She didn't come to give me pat answers about why it happened. She didn't come to say, here's how you ought to feel. She just came to be a presence, to pray with us, to grieve with us. Had she come in with easy, simplistic answers, I'd have thrown her out. We were very raw at that time, and all we needed was someone's presence. And I will tell you that the gift of presence is often what people in grief need. They don't need cliches about, oh, he's in a better place, that kind of nonsense. They simply need us there as common human beings with a common humanity among us and between us. So that got things in my family off to the right start. Then we relied on each other. We allowed each other to yell and scream at each other about how terrible this was. We got together personally. We are scattered across the country. I have a sister in California, a sister in Illinois, a sister on Cape Cod, and I'm here. But over time, the four of us siblings and our children really managed to see each other, have managed to see each other in person quite a bit. That's much less true this last year in COVID, but being in each other's presence and mourning together has been helpful. It's also been helpful to be in some formal grief counseling groups that some people have taken advantage of. And those are available to people. So you just remember that if something like this strikes you, you don't have to be alone. You're not alone. There's help out there. And if I can be of help to you in that regard, let me know. I'm easy to find.
I was reading a news article this weekend that was examining all the things that have happened in our country of late, and of course, leading up to the riots and the deaths at the Capitol. But it made the case that what a lot of people are experiencing in watching this is kind of akin to mourning. That they're mourning the loss of innocence in a way. They're mourning what they perceive maybe as the loss of their country as they knew it. Do you think that accurately kind of reflects how some people are feeling?
Yes, I do. What I would say that it's not the first time, those of us who are old enough know it's not the first time Americans have felt that way. I felt that way in Vietnam when I wasn't in Vietnam, but when the Vietnam War was going on, when I recognized that our governmental leaders were lying to us. And later, when in Watergate, when I recognized that our president had committed impeachable offenses, was lying to us, that loss of innocence seems to happen again and again. But I have to remember that there's every few years, there's a new generation that has not experienced those same things that I have experienced. And so we are 20 years past 9/11. I have an 18-year-old granddaughter who was not born when this happened, and she has had to come to terms with the fact that a member of her family died and what that was about. So, as I say, we have to recognize that there is history here that not everybody shares, and part of our job as adults is to share that history and to be as accurate as we can about it. But yes, people are, particularly the last few weeks, have been going through some very shocking stuff, and it's going to take a while to recover from that for sure.
On a lighter note, we have somebody that's wondering how Adam Hamilton came to help you with the book or to write for the book.
Well, I've known Adam a long time. In fact, I've told Adam this story, so I don't feel badly about telling you this story. First time I met Adam, he was actually an assistant pastor at Central United Methodist Church down about 51st and Oak. He did the funeral service for the mother of a friend of mine at the Star. What a boring service. It was just flat. And I came out of that service thinking to myself, I don't think this guy is going to make it in ministry. Well, either Adam was really having a bad day or I was having a bad day, because Adam has gone on to be a national leader in church growth and church planning, and he's written 20-some books. And over the years, I've gotten to know Adam better. After that first meeting, we met again on a number of occasions, and I began to recognize the skill and wisdom that this man has. And over the years, we've had various interactions, and I've reviewed some of his books, and we've talked with each other in different ways, and I've written about him. So when it came time, I just thought he was kind of a natural person to turn to, because he does have a national voice. And if you can put somebody like that in your book, that helps. So I asked Adam, and at first he said, maybe I can have time to write a little blurb, but which he did. And I said, Adam, would you turn that into the foreword? And eventually he found time to do that. I'm really grateful for that. But one of my daughters, in fact, was a member of Adam's church for a long time. And my oldest granddaughter was confirmed at CORE at Church of the Resurrection. So we have a family connection there as well.
Okay. Well, I think we've gotten to, if not all of the questions, if I missed anybody, I'm sorry, but a good cross-section of them. So I would like to end with this, Bill. For people who are picking up your book, what's the one or two lessons that you hope that they take from it?
I would say it's to commit yourself to not be discouraged by the evil you see in the world, but rather to show an affirming flame, as W.H. Auden said, to move ahead anyway, to make yourself vulnerable and available to others in grief, to commit yourself to finding the truth about matters, and to recognize that although you may be deeply committed to your faith tradition, there are other faith traditions from which you can learn. And you don't have to commit or convert to those traditions, and you don't have to force others to convert to yours to be able to learn from them. So I have learned, for instance, from my Muslim friends about the discipline of prayer 5 times a day. I've learned from my Jewish friends the idea of the importance of memory. And there are lots of things we can learn from other faith traditions. And I hope that when you think about the evil that religion sometimes causes in the world, you will also recognize that it does a great deal of good. And you can be part of that, and you can insist on being part of that good and not being part of the dark side of that.
All right. Well, for everybody that missed the beginning, the book is Love, Loss, and Endurance, a 9/11 story of resilience and hope in an age of anxiety, available today, just today. So I hope you'll check it out. Bill, that was great.
There it is. Great. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for being here.
Good night, everyone.